challenge the district of how do we become a team that moves this thing ahead. Because church multiplication, I think, is something very important. My wife and I, Cheryl, my wife and I have planted 3 churches, 1 in Pennsylvania, 2 in Minnesota. And we got called from the last church plant in 08 to come to the district. And Minnesota, the beauty of Minnesota is we have 1 state and everything's in 1 state. It's still a little big, but it does take a lot of distance now. And God has blessed us in unique ways, so appreciate it. So what I want to do is we're going to move through some stuff they've asked us to be done by 10 after. Is that right?
Yes.
We're going to try to honor that so we can keep moving ahead. And you know, I kind of look at snowstorms down here. You have wind and snow. Where we're at, we have cold and snow. So, and neither one of them bother me. So you just got to hopefully fly out. So we're developing a multiplication ministry, and what I want to do is to help you understand multiplication, because if we don't understand what multiplication is, then we understand why do we plant churches. And I think another thing that we've done too long is we've done church planting as an event, not a process. If we do it as a process, then it becomes something that's natural. And most of you guys and gals have had families, raised families, you know, it became natural. You have kids at a certain time, raise them up, and then send them out to raise them up and to have kids. And I wonder why we can't understand that in church. And that's what they're seeing across the world. We're seeing church plants multiply, churches multiply. We heard the missions guy sharing about, 7,000 over in Kenya in the last 15 years. We have a dear brother that in India, their ministry has planted, I think they're up to 17,000 since 81. And they are all new, unreached areas. And so what happens is one group comes to Christ, and then they realize that, well, that neighborhood that next community doesn't know Christ, and they start praying about that. And they think, one church plant, as they plant churches there, they all automatically start thinking about who's our next pastor we're sending out. So as soon as they start a church, who's our next pastor we're sending out? Who's our next pastor we're sending? Whoa, wouldn't that be different?
Yes.
So that's multiplication. So let's look at multiplication, because multiplication is something, come here, it turned on. Multiplication is something that is God's first command. If you look in Genesis 1:28, someone want to read that out loud?
And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth.
He's talking about multiplying, right? His command is be fruitful and multiply. Is he just talking about making babies? Or is he talking about more than that? How do you know more than that?
Well, there he was talking about all those things. He wasn't talking about the church thing there,
But he's talking about this too, dominion. He's talking about raising up a godly generation that continues to have rule and authority over the whole world. And this is before sin. So what he's saying is, I want you to multiply, and that should be something that's normal. And then and you to have authority. You're not only making babies, but it's having a godly community, godly generations that rule the earth. And so and you see that again. You're going to hear that repeated to Noah. You're going to hear that repeated to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You're also going to see, if you study in the Davidic covenant, you're going to see God talking to David about multiplying. So it's something that's in the whole Old Testament. Now, we say, well, so where do you see the New Testament? Well, I see it in Jesus' last command. Someone will read that. It's not in here verbatim, but think with me a little bit. Someone read that out loud?
Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age.
So who's he talking to here? His disciples. So he's talking to, and that's at least 11. We know it's at least 11. We don't know if it's more than 11. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning.
Hey, we're going to have plenty of time to get to the airport today.
I know, I didn't. I skipped the worship this morning, so I thought I got here late for this.
So, like the thing is, he's talking to his disciples, And he's telling them to go and make disciples of who? So 11, he's talking about 11 guys to go and make disciples of all nations. Do you see the unwritten in there? It's unwritten in there because he's saying that you're going to do it by going and making disciples. Disciples is the baptizing and teaching them to command everything, and he's going to be with them. But the idea there is go, as you're going, we're going to multiply, we're going to multiply, we're going to multiply.
So you're making what's the difference between dominion and making disciples? Is there any difference between having the dominion and making
The
disciples?
dominion, what he's telling us, he's telling them to have rule over the whole earth. And making disciples we're helping them become people who live out God's rule on the whole earth.
Okay.
And I'm going to say it's not identical. I'm going to say it's similar. And so it's the idea that he's asking them not asking, he's telling them to go do it. That there's the command. This is the command here. Make disciples. This is the adverbial imperative. There's one, and here's one. So he's telling them how to do it, but we need to be going. If you want to see it another place, see it in Timothy's call. Here's the question: how many Tom, you know
I
the
won't
answer
say.
there. How many generations are in here when you read it? How many? Someone read that out loud. And then how many generations do you see? How many spiritual generations?
What you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also.
How many?
Jesus, another one, another one.
What you've heard from me, there's two generations here, right here, two spiritual generations, in the presence of many witnesses, and trust to other people who will do what? And see, I think that's the place, we all do these here pretty well. We do this here pretty well, right? But here he's saying, make sure you pass it on, pass it on. And are we looking at people who we can pass it on? See, that's the multiplication piece. Are we passing it on, passing it on? And are we raising up people who do that? And then the last one is, I love this, and this is the results of multiplication. Someone read that?
After this I looked up, and behold, a great multitude, that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and people and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, crying, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb.
Wow. Wow. Guys and gals, here's where we see it. We are on the right side, right? Isn't that going to be something? Where do you see the multiplication in that? Where do you see the results of multiplication? Because remember, when he gave out the great commandment, Jesus, it was to who? The Jews only. Only from Israel. So where do we see the multiplication, the results of multiplication?
Every nation, all tribes.
Pardon? Speak up.
Every nation.
Every
All
nation.
tribes and peoples and languages.
You see that? You see it, there's, no one can number it, so it's much more than 11. You also see that it's every nation, all the tribes, all the people, all the languages standing before the throne. God is going to be reaching them all. And we get to be a part of that. That's the beauty of being in the church and being about multiplication. We get to be a part of it. For some reason, he chose us. I haven't figured that out yet. I think if I was him, I could have probably figured a more effective way
Yeah.
of people who would have done it every time. You know what I'm saying? But the beauty of it is we see that he reaches out and he's reaching the whole world through that. And he's reaching through. And so, but how do we work out multiplication in the church? How do you do multiplication? How do I do multiplication? I being a simple farm person, I have to have stuff worked out for me. And as I started working on it, I said, I see really 5 lanes in multiplication. First, it's a loss to follow Jesus. And, this is one place that we as a church I'm finding that many of our churches are struggling at because we're still shuffling decks. A lot of times it's Christians, these Christians over here are struggling, so they leave this church and they come to our church, right? Do you have any of that? And they're always fun people to have in your church, because they come hurting, they're hurting. And the trouble is, a lot of times they don't know what their hurt is, and they don't want to deal with their hurt. And so then you punch that same button, and all of a sudden, you get hurt too, because they're hurting people. But as they're doing that, we need to think about reaching the lost. We had Luther here yesterday. Luther made a statement that it dawned on me again. I preached it, but I haven't preached in this sense. In John 4, Jesus tells the disciples there at the woman in the well after the Samaritans come, he says, open your eyes. Look, the fields are white for harvest. And Luther made a statement yesterday. He said, look, we Anglos, we have one non-Anglo brother here, so he ended up a little different. But we have struggle seeing a lot of the lost. We don't see the down and outers, the herder. Our brother just shared up there, let's go on a mission trip, or what do they call it, the first trip?
Vision.
A vision trip. I turned to Mike and I says, Mike, why don't your district do a vision trip to downtown Kansas City? Let's start next year having vision trips. And I need to do the same with ours in Minneapolis. We have 180 languages spoken. We have five immigrant groups. The largest outside of their native country is in Minneapolis. And again, what are we as a church doing? Some, but not a whole lot.
Dan, in the scriptures, it seems like people are forced to go out.
Right.
It's the natural inclination of the church to stay there. Jesus said go, and so God sends persecution, and they have to go. And now we hear about these things in India and other parts of the world that there's significant persecution, and they go.
Right.
And so one of the reasons we're struggling so much here in America is because we don't have that push to go. I mean, what are some of your thoughts on that?
Jim Anderson was one of our pastors who is retired now, but he was working in this district here. And they had a prayer meeting, and they had a mixed group. They had a group of struggling pastors in the inner city, and then themselves, and they were going around sharing about stuff, and they asked Jim what he needed, and Jim says, well, my people are all wealthy, and they're doing well, and we're trying to preach the gospel. And a couple of the black pastors got together, and they said, hey, wait, you got a harder work than we do. And I think Jesus said, what does he say about the rich?
There's a camel and a needle and a hardship.
He said it's harder for a rich person to come into the kingdom than it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And I'm wondering if in our society right now, if things are going so well, we don't need God. And because of that, I think what you're saying, we have to be praying. We have to really pray and let God break our heart for the lost. I had a guy in my first church plant that every time he'd pray for lost people, he'd just weep. And I've always kind of wished that my heart was broke like that. I saw a guy last week down in Hutchinson, one of the churches I planted, and a guy who was one of the wealthiest guys in town, and I went up and shook hands with him and said hi to him, and he thanked me for saying hi to him. And as I walked away, I says, he knows me, but does he know I love Jesus? And have I challenged him about Jesus? God all of a sudden just took me to the heart. And I wonder, guys and gals, are we taking to the heart about lost people?
So the second question, Jesus said he gave people as gifts, these pastors and evangelists and apostles and teachers.
Correct.
Is part of the reason we're having problems is because we're not allowing those particularly gifted to go and do that? Or are all of us supposed to be doing all of this stuff?
I think, and now I'm gonna start stepping on toes, sorry guys, I'm not doing it on purpose, but I
That's
think,
why we wear steel toes around you.
I think one of the biggest things we have done as pastors, we thought we had to do it all. And if I understand that passage there, we're to do one thing. We're done to equip the ministers for the work of services. And how are we gonna equip? And I'll move on, because I think that comes out of the
We're
next.
supposed to be examples. Yesterday we said we're all supposed to be examples. And then we're supposed to let them do the work.
Mhm.
So I gotta be omnicompetent, but let them do the work.
No, you gotta be training them as the Spirit leads you. Because see, the second lane of this here is disciples to obedience and release. That's your Matthew 28. You know, are we raising them up? But again, we have to be equipping. It's about who are we raising up? How many people are we raising up? Are we raising people up? And again, it has to be, we have to be careful that we don't just raise up already Christians. I'm good at discipling already Christians. Excuse me. I mean, I'm honest. I'll bet you a lot of you guys are too, right? But are we good at raising up the lost? One of the big things about raising up the about being a disciple maker, I see these two stuck together. And if they're stuck together, then I'm leading people to Christ, raise them up. But also as I'm discipling, I shared yesterday an illustration of a hand forward, a hand backwards. As I'm growing in Christ, I need a hand forward for God raising, helping me grow. But I need a hand backwards, both to Christians and to lost people. I woke up this morning to an email at 4:30. I told some of you yesterday here, I have I have lost neighbors that consider me their friends. They were texting me at 4:30 this morning for prayer. And you go, okay, that's what we want. And so, but are we doing that, guys and gals? Do we have lost friends who say, you're my best friend? You're the friend I can count on. Because if we're not, then we're going to get to the place where we're raising up leaders. That's the third one, leaders to competency and release. And this hard, that last one's a hard one, release. Because most of us churches want to raise them up to what?
To keep.
So I can keep them. But are we, again, if I understand, we're called to be the shepherds, under shepherds, so God can take them where he wants, right? And if we're praying about someplace else, another neighborhood or something, and we need to, then we need that. And the third one's small groups multiplied. And that becomes, those three here, I think we as a church a lot of times are good at.
So
Except maybe with this one here.
So how did you teach your church it's okay to leave for ministry? Did you?
I modeled it. They
How
got
did-
ticked at me when I left.
Okay.
I had one gal that I had a couple we led to Christ. And I saw her 3 months afterwards, and she wouldn't even speak to me. I went to her and said, Jen, what gives here? She says, I don't know how to relate to you right now. I have no idea how to relate to you. How we showed them, we sent out a church. We worked on sending out a second church. We constantly talked about, are we sending people out?
Because one of the things that I experienced in both church plants is church might say, God love you, we love the church plant, gotta go, but there wasn't any bite to it, because they would never go to the people that actually lived in the community and challenge them. None of that.
Yeah, man, and what we need to do is, we need to model it. We need to be living with the lost, and we need to be ones who model it. And taking, and here's another thing, equipping. Let's go back to equipping our leaders. How do you best do that? Do we best do that by teaching them or by walking with them and doing it? Are we taking guys and gals with us when we go out in ministry?
I know, that's a big one for me.
Because God can start moving their heart then. If we stay back here, it's not gonna move their heart. We can come and tell a story, and celebration helps us to empower other people to do it. But if I take somebody and they see me doing it, what did Jesus do? He taught them, he took them out, he showed them how he was doing it, and then he said, you go do it. Right? Are we doing that? Because that's important. And see, the last thing then is gonna be that we're gonna see churches starting. And we have to. If you want to, you shared about your churches, starting some churches, right, Ken? And you know, again, our church, last church, we started one, and then I left, and the next pastor came, and we finally got that second one started. But I never thought of multiplying out churches. I just thought of growing the church bigger, and then I realized that if there's other areas, both of our churches are going to places that are 10, 15 miles away. But if I would have been wise, and this is back on me, I believe we could have planted another church right in a town of 10,000. And it would have had a different demographic, because it would have reached the different people. I think we could have planted a postmodern church.
That's why I wonder, you know, I'm in a city of 24,000.
Yeah.
And, there's so many people, they don't go to church, you know.
Right.
And I don't think about, I guess I haven't thought about planting, I'm not a pastor, obviously, but
Yeah.
I haven't thought about planting churches, but I think about starting home fellowships, you know, or, of course, our church was started in a home.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was officially said, well, this is to be free or whatever, it was some guys that, you know, so I think there was some connection to the Evangelical Free Church when it started, but, I don't think about going and starting I just haven't thought about it in terms of a church, you
Well,
know,
but-
in a home fellowship.
But see, you don't have to. See, if God's leading you to start multiple groups, I would not ever encourage this to become a church until this is multiplying 2 to 3 times. Because if not, you don't get multiplication in the church's DNA. Once you get 3 small groups, guess what you have? Whether you like it or not, someone's gonna have to pull that thing together and keep those things going.
And then it becomes called church.
And you guys start figuring out how to put it together. And we have, and I think we're gonna have to, guys, what you brought up, Tom, is so real. You and I both know, if in the last 10 years, society has changed so much. If it goes that quick the next 10 years, we probably won't have tax write-off for the churches. We probably won't have tax write-off for gifts. And we probably have persecution. We may not have housing allowance, because all that stuff's gonna go. They're gonna say, well, look, how are we gonna pay these taxes, that we have bigger tax bills? Well, guess what? You guys got big properties. They'd like to have a tax on this one. City of Wichita would. And so, what's gonna do? That's gonna push us out. And then we're gonna have to start figuring out how to reach the lost. I read this book here. Here's a book that you may want to read if you haven't read this book. I Once Was Lost. It's by Everton Shaw, and he talks about reaching the postmodern. And I'm talking about you, Greg, you and me, we're that age, right? We understand evangelism explosions, the other types that we went. You go knocking doors, and you could get in and talk about Jesus, and in an evening or 2, you could lead people to Christ. 2 chances now, slim and none at all. Because most of the people you're gonna knock on the door, they're gonna slam in your face because they don't trust a Christian. And we've given them all the rights to do that too. And then our society and our news and all that stuff doesn't help us a bit. So how are we gonna go to the next step to become people who are really reaching? It's gonna be us take a step out. We have to become a people, the lost are not gonna come to us, we're gonna go to them. We gotta go onto their turf. He says the first thing you have to do is, the first threshold for most postmoderns is they can trust a Christian. Trust a Christian. You go, what? Yeah, but how are they gonna trust a Christian? The news media is not gonna help you. So you have to be in relationship. And you have to have people you count as your friends and stuff, so. So now, I'm gonna they told me, and we're down to 20 minutes. Those rascals. I'm gonna flip through that again. Any questions up to this point? Because what I'm gonna do here now is, I wanna push and I wanna change a little bit and go a little different direction.